Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Pleasure to introduce today's speaker, the head of U.S. Public Policy for LinkedIn, Nicole Isaac. The rapidly expanding global economy is forcing us to change the way we think about labor and the structure of a workforce. In that, there are many issues facing the more than 3 billion people in the global workforce: open displacement through automation, increased unemployment and underemployment, and talent attraction and retention. Discussion of these topics often dominates the headlines, and yet solutions remain elusive. Or are they? One of the companies dedicated to addressing these workforce issues is LinkedIn, the commonly used professional networking site. The company's research is massive, consisting of nearly 500 million registered users in 200 countries and territories. And while many think of them as simply a place to house an online resume or build a professional network, LinkedIn is actually devising innovative programs at the local level to help create economic opportunity for all workers. Right here in Cleveland, LinkedIn is beginning to work with several local agencies and Cleveland State University to help recruit and retain health information technology employees. The goal is to provide Cleveland and Cuyahoga County with information on the skills local employers need, the skills its workers already have, and to identify and articulate the disconnect between the two. Why is LinkedIn focusing so much of their work at the local level? How is this benefiting job creation and retention and economic opportunity in metropolitan areas? It is in this context that our speaker joins us today. Her role as the head of U.S. Public Policy at LinkedIn, Ms. Isaac is responsible for the company's policy and government affairs portfolio and engages with the federal administration, Congress, and policy-oriented non-governmental organizations on a variety of issues. She joined LinkedIn initially as the head of economic graph policy partnerships and worked with local, state, federal, and international elected leaders on leveraging strategic information for investments in the 21st century workforce and to provide critical labor insights. Prior to joining LinkedIn, Ms. Isaac worked in a variety of positions on Capitol Hill, including serving as special assistant to the President of Legislative Affairs and as Deputy Legislative Director for the Office of the Vice President. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Brown University, a Master's of Arts in International Affairs from Columbia University, and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. In conversation with Ms. Isaac is Michael Goldberg, experienced venture capitalist and assistant professor of design and innovation at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. With support from the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, he created a massive open online course, also known as MOOC, which has attracted more than 120,000 students from 190 countries with subtitles in 16 languages. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, please join me in welcoming Nicole Isaac and Michael Goldberg.
Nicole, welcome back to Cleveland.
Thank you, Michael. It's
Great to be here. I do miss my friend Graham, who gave me a tour the last time.
Nice. So Graham Beasy, the master of Hingetown.
Yes.
So thanks to Graham for connecting you to the City Club and back to Cleveland.
Definitely.
So we were meeting for the first time today, but we were already LinkedIn connected. And in fact, we have 101 mutual connections on LinkedIn.
101.
So I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes asking you about each one of those connections and how you know them.
Okay.
And it's funny, and Molly Walsh and I were talking during the break, that it's so typical actually before you meet someone, the sort of new way that you get to know someone is through their LinkedIn connection.
Totally.
I'm curious, now that you have this amazing position at LinkedIn, did you use LinkedIn to actually get this job, and sort of what was your path to end up at this position?
Yeah, ironically, I didn't use LinkedIn to find my job. My job hadn't been advertised at the time. I ended up at LinkedIn more serendipitously. I had spent 5 years at the White House, and after working at the White House and really trying to achieve change and impact through various administration and legislative consensus, I really, honestly, I went home. I went home to the Bronx, and I quickly realized that so much that I had worked on in government, unfortunately, hadn't sufficiently resonated on the streets that I had walked 20 years before. So there were too many kids on the corner who were still disconnected. And I started a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that is called Code the Streets. And I spent 8 months pitching my nonprofit to everyone who would listen. Literally everyone, anyone who worked in tech, I was like, I have a nonprofit that I just started. Is this the right idea? And it was all around finding ways in which I could connect kids to mentors, people who had already been through comparable challenges, people who could serve as an example for them. And in the process of pitching my nonprofit, I spoke to my now boss at LinkedIn and said, I'd really love to figure out a way to be more invested in this space, whether in California or in DC. And it was about 6 months later that he called me up and said, look, we're not going to fund your nonprofit, but I do have a job that I think you're going to be really interested in. It's very similar to the work that you talked to me about just 8 months ago. And I know that this is something that will help to drive impact at scale. So I interviewed, and somehow magically they chose me for the role.
Great. In your introduction, it referenced a partnership that you've struck here in Cleveland with BioEnterprise, the City of Cleveland, Cleveland State University, and Cuyahoga County around providing analysis and market research around talent flow, particularly in the IT sector. Why'd you choose Cleveland to launch this project?
Yeah, this actually goes back to our dear mutual friend Graham. Graham and I and Dan Pedrati are presidential leadership scholars. So we are a part of a program that selects over 60 individuals across the country that are working in all sectors, all industries, whether healthcare, nonprofit, manufacturing, but really just individuals who have this thing in common, i.e. trying to drive impact at scale wherever they are. And Graham and I were in the middle of Little Rock at the Clinton Library discussing the work that we had done at LinkedIn with other cities, whether it was helping to mitigate youth unemployment in Toronto, or working on the skills gap in New York City or in Los Angeles, partnering with the city of Louisville on the retention of students in this massive healthcare city. And Graham said, Nicole, this would be perfect for Cleveland. Why can't you do it there? And I said, I'd love to do it in Cleveland. Let's make it happen. And Graham brought together a number of partners, including BioEnterprise, Cuyahoga County, and the universities to really determine what are the ways in which, given all the information that's on LinkedIn, how are we best positioned to answer challenging questions that the city may be contending with. So that's how it started. And it's still early, a little early to showcase right now, but very excited about the work that we're doing on understanding the skills gaps, both in health IT and how through better and stronger partnerships, I think the city can absolutely retain its student base.
Right. So Cleveland, like many cities around the world, is raising their hand to be Amazon's next headquarters. Yes. There was an article this week in our Cleveland Plain Dealer about we have this great lakefront site, that'd be our airport, where that could be an attraction site, and we maybe even would ask LeBron James to play basketball with Jeff Bezos to attract it. Who knows what's in our package?
Nice.
But we do have one issue, according to, and perhaps this is the area and related to the future of work. Our region ranks 211th in the nation based on its share of tech or STEM employment, according to the most recent data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. What does that mean for a city like ours to be able to land companies like Amazon when you've got this challenge in the STEM field?
I will say, fortunately, without being privy to Amazon's decision-making processes, I understand that Amazon won't solely be relying on federal data to make that determination about its next headquarters. And why won't they rely on federal data? Because as great as our federal government is, we recognize that federal data right now lags behind private sector data in many respects. So for instance, when you think about LinkedIn and the information that we have on our platform, we have over 100 million individuals, 160 million in the US alone, 500 million globally, but 10 million companies that we can see who are hiring talent, recruiting individuals from Cleveland to go to San Francisco or vice versa. And we can understand, because of all of the educational institutions that are on LinkedIn, over 30,000 alone, we know who's training the students, and we can see the life cycle. Who is going to Case Western? At what point are they studying biohealth or health IT? And to what extent are they being recruited outside of the city because they have a skill set that is most in demand elsewhere and not only in Cleveland? And so while Amazon, I think, will definitely look to federal data, it's absolutely critical that companies understand the ways in which information at this stage and at this level can be surfaced through many spaces, and looking to LinkedIn to help surface that information.
So you're maybe our second high-profile visitor from DC this week. So Federal Reserve Chairwoman Janet Yellen was here earlier this week, and she actually went to Tri-C to look at an initiative around a Right Skills Now program. A lot of her discussion was focused on the more traditional manufacturing sector. I'm curious if you can comment from where you sit at LinkedIn. A lot of folks, we've talked about sort of high-tech jobs and sort of highly skilled jobs. How are some more traditional other positions, like in manufacturing, how might they be using the LinkedIn profile, and how might employers be able to sort of match up with folks that are looking for work?
Yeah, so I talked a bit about those 9 million companies or 10 million plus companies on LinkedIn. They represent all industries, all sectors. We know that over 90% of them are small and medium-sized businesses. And whether they are hiring the person who's versed in manufacturing or the person who is versed more so in tech-related skills, the goal is to leverage online tools to access that talent base. And I think for us, I see students in the room, and I'm really excited because I keep turning that way and wanting to talk to them. We're most excited about the student representation on LinkedIn and the ways in which that needs to be more of the future and more represented across the platform globally, because that really is our future. When we think about tackling challenges with the future of work, whether it's AI or automation, it's recognizing that there needs to be more cohesion across each of the respective stakeholders for purposes of contending with the challenges that the chairwoman highlighted, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's health IT, or whether it's tech. I think the second thing on that point is we're in a place where tech skills are in demand across all industries. And so recognizing what those skills are, but not getting hung up on them. Soft skills, critical and foundational learning skills are absolutely important for that next job. And so understanding the extent to which, if a student is going to a four-year institution and they are studying, your basic presentation skills, that is going to absolutely be necessary for that long-term job.
Let's talk about LinkedIn and some of these non-degree bearing programs and certificates, both in the way that students are representing. So as was alluded to in the introduction, I teach a MOOC for Case Western Reserve. When you take that class, you don't get university credit, but you can get a certificate from Coursera, and there's many other types of certificate program. And we were talking before about the way that people are representing that. Also, LinkedIn acquired Lynda, which is a wonderful sort of skills-based platform. And again, when folks complete a Lynda course, it's not the same as graduating from a four-year university. I'm curious if you can give some perspective as the number of opportunities for students and lifelong learners to get different types of education. How does that, what's the challenge that LinkedIn has in terms of some of it's practically where do these things go, but sort of more broadly speaking, how can folks represent that to employers in a way that sort of catches their eye and maybe gets them the job that they're looking for?
Yeah, that's great, Michael. The biggest challenge, as I referenced, is the student representation, right? Ensuring that when people look at LinkedIn, they not only see themselves, but they see the future of who they could be. It's not only present-based, but it's aspirational, and it should be for everyone. We currently are working to expand representation from not only students, but middle skill and frontline workers. We recognize that of the 170 million in the US alone, we typically skew a bit more professional than we do middle skill and frontline workers. And that's where online courses, that's where online content and educational tools absolutely come into play, because those individuals may not be able to take time away from their job to enroll in a higher degree program, right? They may be able to do an online program. This is also where apprenticeships come into play, and recognizing that you need platforms like LinkedIn to connect everyone at every level for any opportunity long term. And it shouldn't just be for the quote unquote professionals. In fact, some would argue that networks, this network, the 100+ individuals that we have in common, that's more critical for a job than often the job posting, right? It's me being able to point to Buffy, who I met earlier, and the extent to which she can see that we may have people in common, and she may consider me for a role. And so what we're seeing, we actually have a pilot in Utah right now where we're measuring the extent to which individuals who are receiving unemployment insurance. The US every year spends $40 billion on UI, unemployment insurance. We know that right now there's a significant amount that unfortunately isn't sufficiently tracked. Like, to what extent are these individuals getting a job? When are they getting the job? Did that UI insurance actually bridge to a job? Was the job center effective for taking them to that next level? So we've been partnering with the state of Utah on measuring the extent to which individuals who are receiving UI, if they're provided with access to LinkedIn Premium, to a greater network, the extent to which they would exhaust unemployment at a decreased level. So they wouldn't need to be on UI as long. And we're already seeing significant results. And what does it mean? It means individuals who are, quote unquote, not as quote unquote professional, and these terms have stigmas, and it's important to recognize that when we're talking about upskilling the workforce and inclusion. But when we think about middle skill and frontline workers, it's absolutely critical that they use a LinkedIn platform more so than professional workers, because they need that network to find that next play.
I'm curious, you're a global platform, obviously, and you have people around the world. I see it front and center when I have my MOOC students from Zimbabwe to Iran to Vietnam sort of connecting with me. I'm sort of curious, like, as your global footprint has expanded, and primarily still it's an English language, at least as folks networking to me, although you do see people using local languages. Talk about LinkedIn's global expansion, sort of what has that meant, and that interconnectiveness between employers in all sorts of parts of the world being able to connect to folks that they may have never been able to meet before.
Sure. Michael and I actually share not only 101 individuals in common, but we share our love of South Africa, a place where we both worked. 10 years ago, I clerked in South Africa at the Constitutional Court for Dikgang Moseneke, the Deputy Chief Justice who was a political prisoner with Nelson Mandela. And just 3 weeks ago, I had the incredible honor of going back to South Africa on behalf of LinkedIn in partnership with the World Bank. It's a 3-year partnership that we're doing with the World Bank for purposes of actually replicating much of the work that we're doing in Cleveland, understanding the skills gaps across developing countries globally. This partnership is a critical one when we think about scaling, because the World Bank invests $61 billion in investments across the world into developing countries. And so it's a question of, how do you leverage private sector tools, innovation, and data to really help understand what's happening at the local level in a place where certain countries may not have comparable analytics to our BLS or our ONET or our federal data systems. We were in Durban, the largest port in sub-Saharan Africa, and we explained to these city officials, we actually gave them a list of all the top employers on the platform that we were seeing hiring talent. And they said, who is this? There's an employer here that we don't recognize. Who is this? And it turns out that this is a global logistics company that has a very large footprint in the city of Durban that hired the most number of individuals last year. But these city officials did not know that. Why? Because the data systems are not comparable to what we're seeing in the US. And that's why these partnerships, whether it's with the World Bank or other multilaterals, are absolutely critical for scaling. When we think about going beyond just the US and Europe and parts of Asia, it really is absolutely critical that we work with these stakeholders to get our word out and to impact what's happening on the ground.
LinkedIn was acquired by Microsoft. It was, I believe, Microsoft's largest acquisition, or if not one of their largest acquisitions. Talk to us about what does it mean to be part of the Microsoft family, and what things are you able to do independently, and what does sort of being part of Microsoft globally mean for the company?
Thanks for that. Microsoft has been an excellent resource for us. As a parent company that is invested in cloud technology, automation, AI, and supporting the future of work, this has really been a stronger partnership because of all the work that we're doing on the ground in cities. Being able to take that to scale through Microsoft's infrastructure, through their own kind of global footprint, has been fascinating. Microsoft, they're equally, if not more, committed to the future of work because they have the ability to do so at scale, right? We're technically 1/10 their size. But what they've been doing is expanding their footprint across rural America. They've committed to increasing broadband throughout the United States. They've also committed to expanding access to tech training and tech skills in thousands of schools in the US through their tech education program, which Cleveland is one of the partners.
Great. And our last question before we open it up to a broader audience, I mean, and I see this with my students. We have a great number of international students that come to Case Western Reserve University and to our business school. Many of them are kind of getting a crash course on LinkedIn profiles and doing the networking. Yet the job challenges for them, and a lot of it is based on the H-1B and sort of visa system, there are challenges for them to sort of find opportunities, oftentimes to work in the U.S. What are you sort of seeing in terms of some of the for international students sort of coming to the U.S., learning how to network here, but then to some degree being limited by opportunities here? Are people using it, in your perspective, using the LinkedIn platform to find other opportunities in other parts of the world?
They definitely are. They're using it to find opportunities in other parts of the world, whether it's either coming here to the US for developing new skills that can be applied back home, or staying in the US because they've now been employed by a company that can leverage those skill sets. I think it speaks to our discussion earlier about one of the challenges that you hear from employers more broadly in the US with respect to skills gaps, right? Employers are often saying that they cannot find the talent to fill the open jobs that they currently have. And then you have educators saying, but wait a minute, I just educated this incredible level of workforce, of the student base. Why aren't you hiring them? And part of the challenge is the students may not be versed in the skills needed for those employers right now, which requires the employers to do more on-the-ground training or on-the-job training. It also requires more non-traditional education institutions to step up. And so it's a combination of challenges that I think requires all partners in this room, all partners at every level to come together and address. It's not easy when an employer is looking for the talent or when the talent is there and trying to get that job. But at the same time, we know that we have to continue to be a lesson for the rest of the world. I mean, there's so much that our country has done incredibly well, and to the extent that we can manage this future of work to the best of our ability, I think will pay dividends for other countries globally that are dealing with comparable, if not worse, challenges. When you think about youth unemployment, disconnected individuals from the workforce, when you think about the aging workforce in Japan or China, I mean, how to mitigate some of those constraints, we have to get it right. And I think we'll only do this through having everyone at the table.
Great. One last question, because we have so many students here and probably listening or watching on the stream. When you give advice to a young person who says, I'm setting up my first LinkedIn profile, what do you tell them? What are the tricks of the trade to set up an effective profile?
First, I tell them, get on LinkedIn. That's the first thing you do. Get a profile on LinkedIn, fill it out. Add me. I will connect with you. I promise you. If you email me, I will respond. I tell them, don't be afraid to follow everyone and anyone. If you can't connect with them, follow them. They're sharing content. See what Bill Gates is talking about because it's very impressive. Definitely don't hesitate to stop learning and use the platform as a means and a mechanism to always learn and to find individuals who will help you get to where you want to be. I promise they are there. I promise that if you just try, someone will respond. And it's designed to do that. It's designed to be that place for anyone, not just students, but we should all be lifelong students and never stop seeking to have that person who can inspire us and help us get to the next level, whatever that level is.
Great.
I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and today we're enjoying a Friday Forum with Nicole Isaac. She's the head of U.S. Public Policy for LinkedIn. She's in conversation with Michael Goldberg. He's Assistant Professor of Design and Innovation at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. We're about to begin our Q&A with all of you. We welcome questions from all of you, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our webcast. May we have our first question, please?
Yes, ma'am. You semi-answered this question already, but I just want clarification. Because of LinkedIn, do you see people who live abroad making connections here in the U.S. and immigrating here because of what they've gotten on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know I partially answered it with Michael because I started talking about skills gaps globally. We are seeing individuals who use the platform to understand what are the open opportunities, both in the private and public sector, to then apply for those opportunities and come to the US. But we also see that everywhere. We see individuals who are in Australia and wanting to move to New Zealand, or individuals who are in China and wanting to migrate elsewhere in the region. And so there are a number of ways in which the platform enables someone to do that, and we have the analytics to track migration patterns, which is an absolutely helpful analytics for city officials and for government officials, because they then know how to attract talent and retain the current talent that's there.
Hi, I'm Janae. I'm a senior at St. Martin de Porres High School, and we have a corporate work study program. So we go to school, and then one day out of the week, we actually go out and work at different companies. So I work at the Attorney's General Office. What advice would you give us seniors or students of St. Martin de Porres who already are into the workforce, advice on how to better ourselves and get the proper skills that we need?
Sure. That's a great question. I say first and foremost, no job is ever too big or too small. My jobs on Capitol Hill weren't always, the most challenging with respect to the politics, but sometimes the day-to-day support that you had or didn't have. And one of my dear friends who's a chief of staff on the Hill says all the time, you have to be the person who's willing to do it all. So one day you may make the photocopy or you may pick up the phone. I still make photocopies and I still answer the phone. I don't want someone making my photocopies, right? But recognizing that sometimes those are the skill sets that are absolutely going to be critical for that next level, because you just never know when you're going to be called up and they're going to need someone who is versed in organizational management, someone who can immediately understand all of the operational challenges that currently exist. And it was that job where you may have been an intern and they're giving you what may seem quote unquote tedious tasks, But it's that job that's preparing you for that next big thing. That's advice number one. Number two, someone is always watching, and people are watching in a good way. So never hesitate to ask if you can be more helpful. Never hesitate to ask questions. No question is a quote unquote dumb question. And then number three, you really just never know. This I get from the Vice President Biden, who I just loved working for, as well as for President Obama, of course. But at the end of the day, when you were with the Vice President in a setting like this, he would not only be incredibly gregarious and outgoing, as he always is, but he was often the last person to leave. And so for staff, it was sometimes hard because you're trying to staff him and bring him to the next place. But why was he that way? Because he's the most present wherever he is. And he would always take an extra moment to acknowledge everyone. So whether it was, the congressman and the senator, or the wait staff. So he'd be back in the kitchen with Adam, who's an amazing executive chef here, and he would get to know him, and he'd want to have that conversation. And so my final piece of advice is never forget, the stories that you may quote unquote be overlooking, and every job, every single position is one that has dignity and worth. And every person needs to be at the table, regardless of what you think they do or what you think they contribute. And just never forget that.
Thank you for those kind comments about our executive chef. I think he's great too. So you and I beforehand were talking about when the governor appeared last here at the City Club, and he had a few comments about how our education system, our public education system, the reforms we're talking about are typically tinkering around the edges and not really adequately preparing young people for the work of the future, where there likely won't be truck drivers in the same way that we have truck drivers today. There may not even be stock analysts. Those were the two examples I remember that he used. What does LinkedIn know about workplace trends and job trends, specifically the kinds of jobs that will exist 10, 20 years from now? What do you know about the jobs that have disappeared over the life of LinkedIn? And what does that tell you about the future? And do the public policy creators that you work closely with on the Hill, the members you were on the phone with this morning, do they get it and get that they have a role to play and can translate the things that you know into public policy that will make us all stronger in the future?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for that, Dan. The first question, what does LinkedIn know about the future of work? We know right now all of the skills that are currently in demand across the 10 million companies that we can see on our platform. And significantly, when we're looking at a local level, it could be anywhere from 65% of the workforce to upwards of 75% because of that demand for skill sets. In terms of predictive analytics, we're very careful not to predict what the skills of the future will be, but based on what we've seen, we know that there are tech-related skills that are in demand across multiple industries. So we're seeing an increase in Java and C++ and Python and Ruby and all of those tech skills. But we're also seeing more of a significant representation of the softer skills, those skills that are also needed across industries. In terms of the future of work in AI, I will say everyone is very anxious of what this means, and there are projections of anywhere from 40% of certain industries that could be displaced outright, to other higher projections depending on where you're looking and what industry. The challenge is that the positive stories also have not gotten out. So I've heard that while there may be some displacement, we also expect that AI and automation will increase jobs in other areas. So one good example that happened that I just saw recently, when you think about automation and the banking industry, people forget that I'm older than many of the students here, but back in the day, when I would go to the bank for my first summer internship, I presented a check to the teller and she would cash it for me. There were no ATMs when I was growing up in the Bronx, right? There were check cashing places and there were tellers, lots of tellers. People forget that with the automation of this ATM device, we now have millions of ATMs everywhere. And there was a perception that, oh my God, what's going to happen to the tellers? But many of the tellers have then been upskilled into other parts of the financial services industry, and they've since transitioned into better jobs. And so I think there's going to be some of that. You will see individuals moving into other spaces if they have the requisite skills needed to make that transition, which then goes to the final point on what are those skills and how do we ensure that you have them? That's where we all have to be at the table. That's where it's incumbent on us and Michael, all the professors, to work together with the private sector, with the public partners, to understand how to leverage, I think, private sector tools and know what those skills could be. And in terms of policymakers and what they're doing, everyone's anxious. I mean, literally almost every day there's a discussion on the quote unquote future of work or a panel on the future of work. Members of Congress are having hearings on it and the extent to which driverless cars may displace a particular segment of our workforce. They are working very hard to figure it out. I think we'll get there, but I think it's absolutely critical that we do it together and that we ensure that no one's being left behind. Because I think right now, one of the challenges is the individuals who are best positioned to make that transition are those who tend to be higher skilled and not necessarily those who have other skill sets. So it's leveling the playing field, bringing everyone to the table, and ensuring that we're leaving no man behind.
Thank you. My name is Wenju. I work for Global Cleveland. I really like the LinkedIn Learning on your website, and I was able to learn Salesforce and WordPress design, graphic design. My question is, you have a very good selection list, but you don't have everything on there. So how do you decide what subjects or what areas goes on there? And the second question is, once you finish a class, you get a recognition, a credential showing up on your LinkedIn profile. But how well is that recognized in the offline world? Would you suggest students take that onto their resumes or not?
Yeah, thanks. Those are perfect questions. On LinkedIn Learning /lynda.com, we now have over 10,000 courses that are available in business, tech, and creative content. In terms of what courses are available and how we make that selection, I think it's a combination of demand as well as what we're seeing in terms of, to Dan's point, what does the future look like and how can we best help to reflect the future without predicting the future. But it is something that is a work in progress and we have to get it right. And thank you for the heads up that there are courses that are not reflected. And if you have recommendations, I'd love to hear them and I can send it to our team. In terms of the other question around credentialing and how we are managing it, it's really an industry question, right? We know that on LinkedIn, we do our best to make sure that when you take the class, you can tell Michael and you can tell me and you can tell everyone in your network, as well as anyone who wants to view your profile, that you are now certified in these incredible skills. The challenge is, will the employer then look to that and say, okay, this is actually accredited? Is this sufficient for what I need when I am going to hire for this open role? And that's where it's really a work in progress and will require, I think, more deliberate engagement with our clients. We have encouraged them to look at alternative training models, right? The ways in which not everyone is going to the four-year institution. And so be open to this online accreditation. But it also depends on the industry, it depends on the job, and absolutely depends on the employer.
And I'll just add that it's a challenge to higher ed institutions. So people who take my MOOC that aren't getting a degree from Case Western often put our university right there alongside where they've gotten a four-year degree, and it cuts both ways. It's actually in some ways great to broaden. I mean, we've got hundreds of thousands of people that have touched our university, but we have students that are paying and parents that are paying for them to come physically sit in our classroom. So it's a really interesting time and challenge for higher educational institutions as we sort of put these programs out there.
My question was, how does LinkedIn work with like cities that are losing manufacturing jobs and that don't, like, some of their employees don't have the necessary skills to advance? How does LinkedIn work with them to like get them new jobs?
Yeah. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of our city work, which is about 3 years old, and I've been a part of the team for quite some time. In 2015, President Obama launched the Tech Hire program to basically work with over 35, then later 50, then later 75 cities, of which Cleveland is one of them, to understand the skills that are needed in demand right now, mostly tech-related skills, and how through partnerships with traditional and non-traditional education programs could they train the workforce for purposes of getting them those 5 million open jobs. We immediately partnered with the White House on Tech Hire. We provided labor market insights to every one of the 75 cities, and that included providing a list of the top employers. So how can we connect all those job seekers to the open jobs? We provided information around the training programs. So who's training and for what skill set, and how to best bridge the gap between what employers were seeking and what the educators were training for. And then one thing that we've done since then is partnered with multiple cities and gone deeper in each of those cities to figure out what are unique challenges that Cleveland may be facing versus a Detroit or versus a Louisville or a San Francisco, and how is our data best positioned to answer that. I will say for a long time we worked really hard to get into Detroit and some of the more stronghold manufacturing cities, and it was hard because either the timing wasn't right or the data was just one additional piece of data that was less interesting for the city official. And it's been a work in progress. So in terms of how we want to do more of it, it includes more of these city partnerships, understanding ways in which by segment and by industry our data can be stronger. Manufacturing is one of the spaces where our data it's strong, but not as strong as in tech. Our platform traditionally has a strength in tech-related skills, so it's breaking that down in the aggregate and then understanding how it can be valuable for cities that are still looking to develop themselves in those skill sets. And then the last point is on migration. We really work to help cities understand what the talent currently looks like and how to best attract and retain talent through understanding what that employer demand is. I hope that answers it. I went all the way around to come back to it, but I wanted to give you an overview of each of the partnerships, how they've been selected, and why we want to do more of them.
As I listen to your discussions, I go back to a seminar that I attended way back in the 80s when the automation system wasn't, the future of automation wasn't as, and IT was not as well known. And it was a seminar put on by an author who wrote a very well book at the time called Megatrends. And in Megatrends, I'll never forget this. He said, what we really need in the future is to teach students how to learn. And he was very much concerned then, and I would think even more so now, that liberal arts education has gone, it isn't even emphasized anymore. He says his thought was things are changing so fast that if you don't know how to learn for the future, you're going to be out. And I'm wondering what your comments would be as to a liberal arts education, especially for you, Michael. I'm really directing this to you as much as to anyone, at the university level.
Sure. I can start.
Yeah,
You can jump
please.
in. It's funny because we're both liberal arts backgrounds that moved into business. Because I think the larger question, and I know the City Club has done some great work on more vocational education. I mean, one of the things that I see, and we actually have an undergraduate program called the SAGES program at Case Western Reserve University that works with our engineering students across. It's all about sort of writing. So we know that our students going into the workforce, whether you go into engineering, medicine, nursing, business, the sort of skills around writing and reasoning. So this is a program that we do. So I actually teach my Beyond Silicon Valley MOOC as sort of a writing seminar, and a lot of it is around, I mean, there's so much that changes in the way that our young people are being asked to communicate. It's a short memo, it's hyperlinks, it's things that obviously like didn't exist when we were in school. I mean, I think that the liberal arts education, and we have a number of folks at our university that are studying a number of things, but we really do try to get people ready to write and communicate, and I think those skills are important across.
I think we'd echo that. And the key is to never stop learning wherever you are, right? Whether you're at a four-year institution, whether you've gone on and have a graduate degree, and we recognize that upskilling is necessary for all individuals at every level because, as Dan so rightly noted, with the future of automation and artificial intelligence, every industry is at stake, frankly. Every sector will be impacted, and it's just a question of how and what. I was in a meeting in New York on Wednesday, and there's a woman who's a professor at Hastings who mentioned that, you know, she's a lawyer, and the lawyers are afraid they're going to be displaced at some point. So it's just a question of how are we all positioning ourselves for, right? I mean, the lawyers. How are we all positioning ourselves to never stop learning? I think about our student intern who's with the Attorney General office in Cleveland, frankly. I am excited for you. I'm excited because you are coming up at a time when the number of skills that any individual has had to acquire since graduating from undergrad or grad school, it's generationally very different, right? It's had to be much more multifaceted, multi-layered, multi-sectoral. People are staying in jobs. I mean, this millennial stage, like you guys, millennials aren't staying in jobs nearly as long. They're staying in jobs on average 2 to 3 years. The number of individuals in the generation before them who, frankly, could have been okay with roughly the same skill sets in a job for 10 to 15 years, that's no longer the case for anyone. I mean, we're all having to be multi-skilled, having to be agile, having to develop experiences in many spaces, in many sectors. And I just think it requires constant upskilling and being open to new experiences, wherever that comes from.
Hi, thank you. Hi, thank you so much. This has been very interesting. I was wondering if you could talk about what kind of academic connections LinkedIn is working on with social scientists, what collaborations exist, and what collaborations are you interested in? Thanks.
Sure. We have the Economic Graph Challenge. So the Economic Graph at LinkedIn is the way in which we are connecting every individual to opportunity. The workforce currently, the total addressable workforce is 3 billion, and we're really only at over 550 million. And so we know that it's important to work with academic institutions to achieve part of that addressable workforce. A couple of years ago, we launched the Economic Graph Challenge, designed to partner with institutions and academia to understand questions that they may have that only LinkedIn data may be able to provide answers to. So under strict NDA, non-disclosure agreements, we worked with about 11 universities to answer questions ranging from the gender diversity on LinkedIn and the extent to which, you know, when we're looking at CEOs across a particular sector, is a female CEO more likely to become a CEO in 5 years in the nonprofit space, or would it be the private sector or in academia? So we partnered around those types of challenges. We just reopened the Economic Graph Challenge again to academia, and they're in the process of selecting final candidates for partnership. And so stay tuned. I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards on which institutions specifically we're partnering with and what questions we'll answer. But I think we'll have more to unveil in the next year around that.
Thank you. As you were speaking about unemployment and making the transition to getting qualified candidates in positions, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how LinkedIn is changing how recruitment is done. Currently, I'm wondering with your other kind of private sector competitors like talent management systems or applicant tracking systems, something like a Monster and Indeed, wondering what conversations are currently being present where it's not necessarily what you apply to, but who you know at that company, as you were speaking earlier. Was wondering if you could speak on that.
Sure. I can speak to it a little bit because we actually are launching most of this next week at Talent Connect, when our entire exec team will be in Nashville with all of our major clients and customers. So I can't get ahead of their announcement, but just the work that we've been doing most recently includes understanding what are the insights and analytics that can lead to better hiring decisions and can lead to filling talent in a way that is actually better for the employer and leads to more retention long term. And so that's something that a Monster or an Indeed may not be able to do, because while they have the job postings, while they have the employers, they don't necessarily have the profile in the way that we do. They're not able to see the full life cycle, whether you're a student at Case Western and how long you were an intern at the Attorney General's office, and then did you go over to work for Buffy, or did you stay and hang out at the City Club with Dan? And so because we can see that life cycle, there is a way in which long-term, I think our goal would be to make recommendations for clients around the practices that you can engage in for not only recruitment, but for retention, and to really maximize retention.
So as you know, there are a significant number of federal resources that kind of trickle down state to local communities to support job training and workforce needs across the country. And as you're thinking about particularly your role in kind of working with government, having worked in government, but then also the work that LinkedIn is doing, are there any initial thoughts or top priorities around how federal resources for funding workforce and training need to change or evolve to kind of meet where we're going in the future?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I actually have a lot of thoughts on workforce training and development, because it's the space where we do most of our work with the federal government. We know that right now, for instance, we're partnering with the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. They basically represent over 2,500 job centers across the United States. And we're providing curriculum for them, updating their curriculum so that when a job seeker walks into a job center, we've seen where they literally are pointing them to a job board. A job board. Back in the day, I'm going to say that again, like that's what we used to say in the 80s. But back in the day, a job board was literally like index cards on a poster board. This is 2017. That can't be the way in which we connect someone looking for a job to various opportunities. We know that right now on LinkedIn, there's 10 million open jobs, right? We know that Monster and Indeed and all these other entities, they have millions of open jobs. And so to the extent that you're not leveraging online tools to help train the job seeker in the skills needed to access that job immediately, they're at a disadvantage and they're staying out of the workforce longer. So that's one way in which I think change can happen, updating curriculum at job centers, working with the federal government to create more consistency in the practices applied across the board at state workforce agencies. Another example and another recommendation includes just the use of data analytics. And this goes to Michael's point earlier about BLS and Cleveland being ranked 212th, 211th. Right. I think if you looked at LinkedIn data, we would tell you that Cleveland is ranked fairly significantly high. I mean, you're positioned as strongly as anyone else for Amazon headquarters, or HQ too, because you have talent that is seeking opportunity. And because we can tell it to you in a real-time and updated manner in a way that BLS, as great as our federal government is, they're on quarterly reporting cycles. You often need real-time data to make real-time decisions. You can't wait for the next quarter. You can't wait for the census. You need to know what opportunities are here now. So those are just two recommendations I'd make for the federal government. And then, we talked about UI.
Hi, at Maple Heights, we have a capstone project that we have to complete to graduate. And for LinkedIn, could we use it for like reaching out for people who's in that particular major that we wanted to work in, and to help about it?
Yes. I love that question. Yes, And yes. So for the second question, I'll take it first. Can you use LinkedIn to connect you to individuals for this capstone project and to figure out if they have worked in similar places? Yes, you can do that right now. If I want to be a NASA physicist, if I want to change careers today, I could literally go on LinkedIn, type in NASA physicist, determine where most of the NASA physicists went to school. Did they go to Case Western? Did they go to MIT? Where did they go? What skill sets did they study? What courses? Where did they work? Did they work at the City Club? Did they work at Google? Did they work at LinkedIn? And then I can find out who out of all those individuals does Michael know? So I can call up Michael and say, Michael, can you please refer me to that person at Case Western so that I can please have that job or so that I can take that course? So you can do it now, and please find me afterwards so I can tell you exactly how to do that, because I really want to see more and more students leveraging the platform to not only dream about what's possible, but actually make it happen, because it's all there and it's all accessible right now. Thank you.
Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday Forum with Nicole Isaac, head of U.S. Public Policy for LinkedIn, in conversation with Michael Goldberg of Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School of Management. Ms. Isaac appears as part of our Business Leaders Series, presented by PNC and sponsored by Meaden & Moore, Ohio.net, and Ohio.net. We welcome guests at tables hosted by Northwater Partners and others as well, and we welcome students from Maple Heights High School, North Olmsted High School, and St. Martin de Porres High School. Student participation in City Club forums is provided by many foundations, including the William E. Weiss Foundation. We thank all of you for being here today. That brings us to the end of our program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ms. Isaac and Professor Goldberg. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.